Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SCOTONOMICS. It's been so long since I've done this, about 5 weeks. I forgot I normally bring you on, Karen, after I've said hello to everyone. You're on screen. I'm sure that's of a benefit to everyone who's watching. How are you doing, Karen?
Yeah, good. Yeah. Busy with councillor stuff. Yes.
Fantastic. I'm sure you will be. Hello and Happy New Year to everyone who's watching, all those people who've been following us for over a year now, and people who are watching on Twitter, YouTube, and also on Facebook. It's great to have you with us. We've got a topic tonight which is a little bit, I suppose, a little bit different from what we normally cover, and it's just really an opportunity for me to tell you how fantastic the Economics for Sustainability courses that I'm doing online, that's based in Torrens University in Adelaide, but also to give you an idea of what would underpin a topic like that and how they're approaching it. And I interviewed both the kind of main driving forces, Gabi and Stephen, when I was in Adelaide for a family holiday. So I do think you'll really enjoy the interview. It's starting again, the course, where you can apply from February. So I'm also hoping that I'll give a little bit of a push to people who are interested in doing it. It really is fantastic. Before we show the video, we just wanted to have a little chat about some recent economic news, and we're going to have a little conversation around Scotland's green Freeports. So I'm sure you may have seen the news yesterday that there's been 2 Freeports granted in Scotland, and we're going to go into a little bit of detail of what these Freeports, these green Freeports, are. I'd love to hear your comments or any questions if you picked up anything about this, if you've not heard about it, and we're going to spend a few minutes on it. Karen, SNP policy, working jointly with the UK government to have these green Freeports. What's your thoughts on them?
So, just to be clear for the audience as well, policies formed at conference. What our leaders are doing with respect to working with the UK government is, I would say, pragmatic. It would be churlish for us to turn down money of any kind that is offered towards building infrastructure in Scotland. So, yes, we have a lot to be concerned about with these green Freeports. But ministers have worked hard to make sure that the conditions in there, that people will have fair wages, that they'll be working towards sustainable goals. So yeah, hopefully that will help to temper the negative aspects of them, which I think probably a lot of our audience are probably well aware of, actually.
Well, what's quite interesting is that they're only green, or they're only entitled green Freeports in Scotland. They're just plain old vanilla green Freeports in the rest of the UK. So the Scottish government has certainly gone down a route of trying to at least say that these ports are green, and they're kind of incentivizing green technology, and they're also talking about net zero and how it supports. I think one concern I've got, having spent so much time reading the government policies and documents around just transition and green, is that they're saying a lot of really nice things, but I can't really see that being turned into actions at the moment. So that's why I'm looking at these green Freeports and thinking it's okay to say they're green, but actually how are we going to measure that they are in any way benefiting our transition to net zero? And I think fundamentally for me that they've also got to play a role within this idea of a just transition. And the idea that you can have a just transition whilst reducing taxes and reducing regulation and offering a different type of employment for the people who are working in these areas strikes me as being a really difficult balance. So I'll be really keen to see where that lands. You know, these green Freeports are small, but you're able to extend the regulations of the port to quite a big distance, and that's certainly, I know George Monbiot was really concerned about this. This was the first time I read about it, round about, I think it was maybe almost a year ago, when he was talking about what these green ports can do. He said that, you know, looking at all the regulation, it talks about simple framework for environmental assessment. Simpler, like streamlined and flexible, as government speak for the removal of public protections. And he said on Teesside, environmental standards already seem to have been junked to make way for the coming Freeport. So, there is a lot of things that you can say that sounds nice, but certainly there's a lot of concerns here. I don't know if you're aware, the Green Party aren't in favour of this, and they said that they were a really easy way for money laundering and tax avoidance. And I've actually done some reading on that as well. And I found, I think it was the Journal for Money Laundering or Anti-Money Laundering, I would imagine. And it says that, what's it? It says that there's strong evidence that these ports are used for money laundering and tax avoidance. So there is a lot of research that's gone into these free ports to say they are used for very nefarious measures. So I think that's really something to be looking at. Well, the funding has come from Westminster, and I think they said something like 52 million has gone in, and there's other schemes that Scotland and Westminster are using together to kind of get Westminster funds for infrastructure. There's regional deals, there's city deals. Do you think this is just another case of the Scottish government saying, well, if we don't accept this money, we're going to be absolutely hammered for not taking it, and if we do accept it and there's conditions to it, we're going to be hammered for agreeing to these conditions? Do you think they're in a little bit of a kind of rock and in between a rock and a hard place?
Absolutely. I mean, we will never be in control of Scotland until we're monetarily sovereign. And we'll never have fiscal sovereignty until we're monetarily sovereign. And fundamentally, we'll never have political control until we're monetarily sovereign. We are in control. We are controlled by the Westminster government. And, you broke it to me earlier today. I've been very busy that they've now turned over some legislation that's gone through the Scottish Parliament, which was agreed cross-party. So this is the kind of example that shows you just how little power we have in many respects. We will not be able to control many things until we're monetarily sovereign.
Yeah,
so that's what we've got this show on for us to emphasize that to people. No, we won't. We have shared a currency with the UK for 315 years. That's not worked out well for Scotland. So yeah, I want monetary sovereignty. Yeah.
I think it is difficult when you're only the user of a currency. It's hard to say we don't want it. Where if you're the issuer, then you can be issuing it, and it's a very different situation that Scotland's in, is needing that tax, and the UK government has been able to fund spending without really thinking about what they're bringing in terms of receipts for tax. My big surprise, I think, is actually of how supportive the senior SNP politicians seem. And Ian Blackford, I know, was saying these are a wonderful opportunity. John Swinney said the creation of these internationally competitive clusters of excellence will help us to create new green jobs, deliver a just transition, and support our economic transformation. So they're really positive about this. I haven't heard anyone say we're not that keen, but we feel that we have to take it. It seems like they're being, really supportive of fairly extreme neoliberal areas. I'm not expecting you to comment on that. That's my opinion. Then
so what I would say to you, William, is but the Green Party are well able to express their opinion on it. So yeah, Ross Greer has made his feelings very clear. So there is protest within the Scottish government, and they are part of the Scottish government. And this was one of the things that there was a red line for them. So they are able to express their opinion on it. I would just say it would be churlish for the Scottish government to turn down any money which Westminster creates. And as we know, they can literally create it just by voting. So we don't have that luxury.
Yeah. Okay. No, really, exactly. Not yet. Really good points. I think the final point I wanted to say was reading the articles was that, the Firth of Forth bid, which was run by Forth Ports, which is a private enterprise, is kind of has now got a little bit of almost like a fiefdom in Scotland. And I think there's also the Opportunity Cromarty Firth Consortium, another private consortium. So these aren't public bodies that are running it; they're private bodies that are being placed outside of the normal legislation.
Most of our harbours are run by hedge funds.
Yeah.
So this is not a good situation on a, you know, in a war situation, in a really difficult situation like that. You would really want your ports to be controlled by the government. But, you know, neoliberalism has been with us for 50 years, and that's the situation we find ourselves in currently.
Yeah, and these certainly seem an extreme version of neoliberalism, and I would really hope that the people watching the show really do raise their concerns about this, because although it is a done deal, they've still got to work out exactly how they will operate, and all the evidence suggesting that at best they take wealth from one part of the country and replace it somewhere else. And, you know, we're doing that by reducing tax. So it looks clearly from, you know, my kind of heterodox perspective that they're reducing taxes and then moving somewhere else in the country, and then that's being used to reduce the taxes for different businesses. So there's very little economic argument, I think, that these add to the wealth of the country. And, you know, both these ports are talking about creating between 25 and 50,000 jobs. Again, these seem like incredible figures that I can't imagine ever get close to. And if they're created, we only ever talk about the gross benefit. We never talk about the net benefit. What it should say is that there'll be 50,000 jobs created here, but it's going to be 50,000 jobs lost in another part of the economy. And then we get the true figures. We only ever hear the upside when we talk about these types of investments. So a lot to be concerned about, I think.
For me, William, it feels like the crumbs on the table. You know, I mean, fundamentally, and I've said this, I think, many times, you know, the UK government has set up most of its infrastructure in London. You know, this is a poor relation to setting up government infrastructure around the whole country and bringing wealth around the whole country. So instead, you're encouraging people to come in and hopefully, you know, you control them to some extent if you're bringing in businesses from abroad, and you can control what these companies do through regulation and through taxation. But, you know, I would argue that the UK government in general have been pretty lax about that. In fact, they encourage tax havenry, not just in this way, but in multiple ways. And you know, that's a thing that they do very effectively, and it's not.
The world leaders on that for sure.
Yeah, we're world leaders on that, and I would argue that's a tool that's created massive inequality. And there's been a report come out today from Oxfam again showing just how wealthy the really wealthy became during the pandemic. You know, they became a lot more wealthy again, and it's just, again, governments have control over taxation. They you know, so. But not the Scottish government, you know. That's not, and I think, again, I would reiterate this for a lot of people who don't know this. You know, if the Scottish government tax more, it will be deducted from the block grant.
Yeah. So and you know, I think our discussion next week with Alex Cobham touches on that and how difficult it is to say exactly. The Scottish government at the moment don't really know what they can tax and it not be taken off the block grant. So there's a lot of confusion with that. Well, the final thing to say on the ports is that they are designed to reduce regulation and reduce taxation. And, you know, it is disappointing from my perspective to have a Scottish government who's completely 100% behind those two principles of the green ports. They've tried to water it down a little bit with this idea of it being towards net zero, but unfortunately, I think they've made the wrong call there. Easy for me to say. Okay, Kieran, we're now going to speak about the Economics of Sustainability course. I've actually got a 30-minute interview that I did with, as I said earlier, with Gabi and Stephen. I really hope you enjoy it. Kieran's going to come back on with me after it. And hopefully, if you've got any questions about the course or anything that it mentions around modern monetary theory and the economics of sustainability and environmental economics, then you can do that. I hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you in about half an hour.
The economics of the 20th century, well, it was misleading in the 20th century, but it's disastrous or potentially disastrous in the 21st, given the challenges that we face if we're going to build a future global economy which is not only ecologically sustainable, but also just. Professor Stephanie Kelton is one of our consultants. She has been, amongst many other things, the chief economist on the Democrat side of the Senate Budget Committee in Washington. It's possible some people in finance might have heard of Professor Scott Fulwiler. He's a global expert in monetary policy. What we're all working towards is putting together an online, genuinely global qualification which brings modern monetary theory and ecological economics together. The reason we're doing this is because we think it's important, and because it's genuinely the case, as far as we can tell at the moment, that there is no such qualification available anywhere in the world. This is genuinely a world first. Nobody has ever done it before. Now, I was working at a G8 university until the end of last year, and I've been there for about 20 years. And I made inquiries encouraged by people from the finance sector, including Con Michalakis, who is our chair, to do something like this at my former university. But the academic economics profession has been, I think, quite slow to move, quite conservative in this area, and it just wasn't possible. So we were looking round for a partner in higher education who would be interested in a venture like this. And we ended up talking to Torrens, partly because the Vice Chancellor of Torrens University is very interested in ecological economics and sustainability issues, and because the equivalent of the head of faculty knows a lot about modern monetary theory and about another colleague of ours called Professor Steve King. So Torrens was ideal.
So hello, Gabi and Stephen. Thank you very much for spending a little bit of time with us today. I'd love to know where the idea of this course comes from, because no one else is doing it up until now. So what made you come up with this idea?
Well, I think it goes back to the conference that we organised in the summer of 2020, January 2020, which was down at Adelaide Uni. It was called Sustainable Prosperity Conference, which takes its name from the book that Stephen wrote. Conference, the aim was to try and bring the ecological side and the modern monetary theory side together.
Yeah, the idea of the conference was to take people on a journey. That journey involved looking at the essentials of modern monetary theory, which, as people might know, is an approach to thinking about economics and the role of the government in the economy that takes the monetary system seriously. And it's sort of an instruction book in terms of how to manage your economy. But modern monetary theory doesn't tell you for what purpose you're managing the economy. So also part of the journey was ecological economics. Now, ecological economics is about many things, but including within it is the higher purpose of economic activity, bearing in mind that the economy is the set of institutions and markets and resources which are available to us to meet our needs within the capacity of the planet, within our planetary boundaries.
Sustainable Prosperity Action Group, we've done a lot of activism around trying to teach people about modern monetary theory. So one of the things that we did was when Stephanie Kelton wrote the book, The Deficit Myth, we raised some money and we managed to get a large print order of that book happening. So it actually was published in Australia, or available in Australia, a couple of months earlier than it would have been otherwise. And that meant that we could try to get it into the hands of politicians and decision makers using our network of volunteers and activists. And that project is still going to this day. We still have like a bookshelf full of those books that we give to people who are willing to meet with their politicians to hand over the book and explain a bit about what it's about and why it's important. And we run a whole lot of events as well, and we've been particularly focused on the case for a job guarantee. We had an event in April this year, which was purely dedicated to that, and it was much like a kind of deliberative democracies type forum. So very participatory type event rather than a conference format, and that was really successful.
You had quite a big impact. The group, I think, played a major role in changing the approach of the Australian Greens towards a job guarantee mechanism. They don't have an MMT-style federal job guarantee policy, but they have something which is well on the way towards it. And in Tasmania, they managed to pass through the Tasmanian Parliament with the support of the Labor Party the first motion mandating a government to investigate what a federal job guarantee would mean that anybody's ever passed in Australia. And we're trying to do the same thing through other states. Every branch of Young Labour in Australia, apart from maybe the New South Wales branch, is now in favour of something like the modern monetary theory job guarantee. And a lot of that comes down to your campaign group and the work of your campaign group, which was one of the things that came out of our conference. And our course is something else.
You can see a lot of effort was put into the conference and then everything around the campaigning. However, to jump from that to running a course with 12 different modules across that 2-year period is a huge jump in terms of commitment and effort and involvement. You have to do so much more with the course. Stephen, could you tell us how much effort you've put into this from when you had the idea up to where we are now, which is it's the day that the students are getting their results for the first term, so we're getting towards the end of the year. Could you summarise briefly how much effort you've had to put into making this happen?
Should explain that our course has roots in that conference as well. During that conference, Stephanie Kelton met a local fund manager, Con Michalakis, who is very well known in Australia in the finance community, and they, between them, started to urge me to put together a graduate program which incorporated modern monetary theory especially, but also the economics of sustainability, also ecological economics. And I approached the university that I worked in at the time about the feasibility of doing that. And although there was interest across most of the university, the economics department where I used to work was very conservative and blocked it, frankly. And we found something similar happening with other universities that we spoke to. But Con Michalakis was very keen, Stephanie Kelton has been very keen all the way through, and they kept pushing at me. So eventually I was able to talk to people at Torrens University, which is where we're sitting now, and they were cautiously positive about going ahead with a course like this, but we had to jump through many hoops, and we had to persuade a lot of people, first of all, that it was credible, and then secondly, that there was a market for the course. And yes, it's been an immense effort to get everything accredited, to get the materials written, to get websites up and running, to persuade what is basically now a who's who of heterodox economists to work with us on the program, to market the course, to get a significant number of excellent students like William to participate in the course. It's been a tremendous pleasure to do so because, and just to go back to the whole purpose of what we're doing, the economics of the 20th century, orthodox or mainstream or neoclassical economics, to use 3 different names, what is basically the same thing. Well, it was misleading in the 20th century, but it's disastrous in the 21st, given the challenges that we face if we are going to build a future global economy which is not only ecologically sustainable but also just. The challenges that the next generation or generations are going to face are not challenges that the economics of the 20th century is fit for purpose to me. And it's very important to provide people with an opportunity to have a training in a new economics, which has long historical roots, but in important respect is genuinely new and is fit for purpose. People need the opportunity to study this at postgraduate level in a university where you can get accreditation that you can then go on and use to give yourself credibility and also, particularly for some of the younger people on the course, as a basis for a career, because we're already noticing that there is growing interest in government, finance, businesses, not just in not-for-profits, but in them as well, for people who have a slightly different perspective and about the economy, the management of the economy, and about the priorities, what are going to be the priorities in the next generation, what ought to be our economic priorities now. Employers don't want everybody to be saying the same thing, particularly where that same thing is basically the economics of the 1980s that we should have got well beyond now.
Yeah.
And that's what's driven us to put this course together.
I did a talk for a bunch of fund managers recently, and I asked Stephanie for Kelton for some tips on how I should go about doing it before I did the talk. And she said, tell a joke at the beginning and do a little dance at the end. I did a joke at the beginning, it worked pretty well. I didn't do a little dance at the end. I just did a little dance at the beginning of this particular set, because this particular set has the forbidding title, Kaleskian Income Distribution Theory, drawing on the work of Michal Kaleski.
When you do the course, you can see how much content there is and how much work you've had to put into that. And I'd like to ask you a couple of questions on that. But what you've said there is actually that's the easy part. The difficult part was getting all the accreditation, getting everything that you wouldn't necessarily see as a student, and also anyone who's looking at the course. But that's all done now, and we've moved on to the content. I think we've had about 50 lectures that we've had so far. Would you like to give us a little summary of how you've managed to do that for that relatively short period of time?
We started off with just running 2 subjects. In order to graduate, people have to do 12. We've actually got 13 on the books because some of them are electives, and we'll add more electives as time goes by as well. But of the 2 subjects that we've run so far, it wasn't originally intended to be this way, but I've actually done the lectures for both of them. I haven't done the live teaching for both of them, but I've done the lectures for both of them. One of them is an introduction to modern monetary theory, and that is something which it wasn't so much of an effort for me to do, because that's what, I'm not a Stephanie Kelton or a Bill Mitchell, but that's what I'm known for, if I'm known for anything. So it's something I've taught many times before. The other subject was a little bit different, and it did involve a lot more thought, because I don't think there is a subject like it in another qualification. It's not something I've ever done before. We started off thinking about the philosophy of economic inquiry and the fundamental difference between neoclassical economics, where there is very little concern about the realism of the assumptions on which models and theories are based, and there is only really concern about whether the conclusions of models are seen as useful or not. And useful doesn't even necessarily mean having predictive value. It can just mean fitting in with the accepted way of doing neoclassical economics. And heterodox approaches, which are much more about avoiding unnecessary, unrealistic assumptions and developing an economics which is about real people, rather than abstract artificial ones that don't actually exist, and that takes the monetary system seriously, that takes the way economic institutions actually work seriously, including the way businesses actually set their prices. And that was the first part of that subject. The second part was about ecological economics or planetary boundaries, because we passionately believe that all economics courses should start from that point. We live on a finite planet. We have been living outside our planetary boundaries for about 50 years now. We are already beginning to see the consequences of that in terms of the deterioration of our natural environment.
And it's worth saying that this isn't covered on a traditional economics course. And this, I think, having done this first module now, it wouldn't make sense to do an economics course that doesn't have this at the start, because it's the context that's the most important thing. And other economics courses are effectively delivered without any meaningful context. And this is what you've been able to achieve on those first series of lectures, is that this is not only why we need to do this course, but this is the impact that not understanding this has, and not having economists who understand the boundaries and the context of their decisions and who they're influencing.
It's really important.
What's happened in the UK? Has anything happened there which would be a surprise to an MMT economist?
Well, the whole fiasco is in some sense surprising, right? But in terms of like what made headlines, was that did that come as a total shock? Could we understand that from an MMT, framework? I think the answer is we can understand what happened using the MMT lens or the MMT framework. I mean, obviously, the British government, the UK, is a currency issuer, right? The British pound comes from the British government. They are the issuer of the currency. And I'm talking about the Bank of England, as the sort of consolidated reference to the British government. But the pound comes from the UK government. And it doesn't come from anywhere else. And so what we witnessed was, a new government come in and pronounce that they had their economic package included, some subsidies to help with the high cost of energy for households and companies, and sort of across the board tax cuts, especially aimed at people at the very top of the income distribution. So this so-called, supply side economics, trickle down, all that sort of stuff. And they lay out their package. And what you saw kind of immediately was basically bond markets take a gasp, And I think the gasp that they took was, hang on, inflation is running around 10% at the moment. We have an inflation targeting central bank. The central bank is going to look at this economic program and say, why are you doing quote unquote fiscal stimulus, right? Why are you doing this in an inflationary environment?
We then do something similar as far as people as they are. In other words, we talk about behavioral economics or insights from psychology in economics, which have got a bit further than ecological economics, as in mainstream economics degrees, but not far enough by any means. And then we have what I hope is a broadly realistic approach to microeconomics and the way decisions are taken in businesses. Macroeconomics, which overlaps with the modern monetary theory subject as well. And then right at the end, we talk about some issues relating to trade and development. The purpose of this first subject is, as far as I can, to introduce people to all the other subjects that they might choose to take if they decide not to stop at the graduate certificate, but to do the whole master's degree. So, for example, William just mentioned ecological economics. There's a whole subject on ecological economics later on, and there's another subject on sustainable development indicators, which deals with the idea that we should not be managing our economies to try and maximize the growth of the scale of our economic activity or gross domestic product. We should be pursuing other goals, and it considers what those other goals ought to be, what useful statistics already exist, and what statistics ought to be developed to guide policymakers in the future.
I thought we'd start, Farrell, by talking about the underdevelopment trap, which many countries seem to have been in for 40 years or more now.
Very good question. So a lot of the countries in the global south, it's very important to understand that the colonial economic traps have continued beyond the days of independence. And despite all the efforts that many people who are fighting for democracy and democratizing countries in the global south, I always say you can't democratize a system that hasn't been decolonized yet.
Well, that's a fantastic introduction to the course. How well have we done? You must have started over summer thinking we need X amount of students to take this course for it to be meaningful and for us to get something out of all the effort that we've put in. So how many students have you managed to get on the first intake?
So we have about 45 students enrolled. Most of them are doing one subject at a time. Well, about 3/5 are doing one subject at a time, and the others are doing both foundation subjects at a time. So we have across the two subjects, a good number of students. I think we were hoping to get, say, around 25. I would say it was our goal at the beginning, and we've absolutely exceeded that, and we've got a lot of students already sort of on the runway, so to speak, for the next intake, which is going to be in February. So if you're a potential student, please get in touch with us, reach out, contact us through Modern Money Lab or via Torrens University, and we'd be very happy to talk to you about what it entails. But I'll move on from that that little bit of promo there. So the students that are currently studying in that very first intake are a very high achieving cohort. They are so bright, so interesting, so experienced, quite
Not
a
all
joy.
of them. They're not all of them.
A joy to interact with and
I mean, there are some young ones as well.
Yes, that's true. Yep, there's some that have come straight from a Bachelor of Economics or another bachelor degree. There are retired people. There are people working in the environment sector, in renewable energy. There are professional sports people. We have a student who plays for Queen of the South Football Club.
Yeah, they could probably work out who it is.
Yeah, probably. We have writers, journalists. We have 3 podcasters, including William.
We have a head of department in a capital city in Australia.
Yes,
without
we
being
have
more specific.
somebody who works for a significant charitable fund. We have, we just have a fantastic bunch of students. About just over half of them are Australian, and the rest of them come from all different places across the globe. Quite a few from America. Obviously, there's a big modern monetary theory school in America around UMKC, so we have some students who've sort of come from that.
The balance is probably changing a bit though. Looking at the applications for February, I think we'll end up going from more than half being Australian to probably in the first intake no more than 50. So we had about as many people come through as we could easily cope with. Because just in terms of administrative procedures, when you're doing something like this, even in a well-established university like Torrens, not everything is going to work very smoothly at the first time. But it's with the number that we've had, we've been able to look after people and make sure.
Yeah.
We didn't really want to do a hard sell initially, partly for those reasons.
There are people out there who've been asking for something like this, who've been waiting for the chance to do this for many years. And it's just such a joy to be able to now say, come and join us. It's been such a great learning experience for me. I've been to most of the tutorial sessions as an observer and kind of IT support person and question answerer. And I've just really loved getting to know our students and having conversations with them, really inspiring people on our course.
But has it been hard? Yes, I've virtually worked myself to death the last 2 years doing this.
You deserve a break, absolutely. There's no doubt about that. There's no one else who's looking at an economics degree that's underpinned by MMT and ecological economics, and that sets it apart. But what is also different about the course is the online element. And people don't need to do what I've done, which is come to Adelaide to study the course.
That's right.
Because it's an online course. So do you want to just give us a little bit of background on what made you make that decision?
The major elements is something perhaps people might not have thought of, which is that I was hoping that over time we'd have a who's who of MMT economists and others teaching with us, and that's how it's turned out to be. So we've had as guests on the course already, we've had Fadel Kaboub and Stephanie Kelton and Steve Keane, but we're going to have a subject lecturers next year, Scott Fulwiler, well, he lives in Kansas City, Eric Dean, he lives not in Seattle, but he lives somewhere in that general direction. Dirk Enns is in Berlin, Sonada Nukic is in Paris. We couldn't do that if it was face to face. But also, of course, it's been great that we've got students from all over the world, people who would not have travelled to Adelaide, or if we were running this at one of Torrens' other campuses in one of the biggest cities in Sydney or Melbourne. And to an extent, I think this is a course for the future. I don't think people should have to fly around the world in order to interact with people from other countries and maybe from other cultures on courses like this one. Many things came together and made this possible. It's been a great experience. The pressure is going to come off me next year because of those guys I just mentioned. I didn't even mention John Harvey, did I? Who some people may be familiar with, the cowboy economist from Texas. He's going to be teaching one of the subjects too. It's going to be much less of a one-man and one-woman band next year. Everything is developing there very nicely. I've spent a career, at least the last half of my career, being a token heterodox economist in an orthodox or conservative economics department. And what we've had the opportunity to do here is to put together a whole postgraduate degree which doesn't ignore orthodox economics, but always presents an alternative to it and always has a critical perspective as far as orthodoxy is concerned. So I hope people come out of it, not just with a qualification, which for some people might be useful from a career perspective, but also empowered so that they can engage in debates online with, you can debate with famous professors, Nobel Prize winners now on Twitter, but you can do that with confidence because you know where they're coming from and you actually might be a little bit less respectful about what they have to say in some ways. I hope we're always polite with people, but certainly not intimidated because not only do you understand where these people are coming from, but you understand the flaws in their reasoning that sometimes they're not aware of.
Well, firstly, thank you to Stephen Hale and the Modern Monetary Lab for inviting me to give this presentation. It's one I wish I didn't have to give because this is life-threatening. It isn't just that mainstream economics leads us astray about the functioning of the monetary systems, as we all in this course know it does. It's also, I think, potentially jeopardising the capacity to have an advanced civilization on this planet. It's that bad.
Well, that's a really good summary of what we're looking to do with the course. Underpinning this, I think, when I've been doing all of the lectures, is the idea that what we've been taught is not true. And there's a lot of common myths, and almost at the end of every lecture, you can kind of write something down that says, oh, what I thought was true is actually not true. So it'd be impossible for us to go through all of the things that we've explained just in the two subjects that we've done so far. But what would be the 3 top myths that you think are busted with the content that we've covered so far this year?
It's the myth that we can keep growing forever. Stephen likes to say to students, you know, we have, 3% economic growth, global growth at the moment. And if we were to keep growing like that for the next 250 years, the economy would be 1,000 times as big as it is now. And nobody can hear that and think that is going to be a possibility for us. You know, it's just ridiculous. So I think the myth of perpetual economic growth, that growth is going to keep going forever and save us from poverty and destitution. I think that is something that really is very, very important to to get your head around. The other myth that's kind of related to that is that the government needs to budget like a household. And of course, we know that not every government is a monetary sovereign government, but many, like in Australia, we do have monetary sovereignty, and in the US as well, the world's biggest economy, and the UK. The government is not like a household, and the government's deficit is everybody else's surplus, and that's something that Stephanie Kelton is a genius communicator in explaining how that works. Relating to that government budget being like a household myth, that sort of plays into the idea that we have to keep a certain percentage of people unemployed in order to keep inflation down. If you think that the whole narrative is about punishing people for not being able to get a job, while at the same time forcing them not to have a job, to be in that position yourself, you know, we are all at risk of that happening to us at some stage, I just think is incredibly unjust and really, really sad. And you can see there's been some really awful things happening in Australia with the government trying to recoup fake debts from people that it believes that it overpaid their benefits to, and that's led to some really, really tragic circumstances. You know, people's lives have been ruined by this. People have lost their lives over this, and it never needed to happen. And I think we need to be angry about that. We need to understand what's happening, and we need to be able to explain why these things don't have to be the way they are.
So looking ahead to 2023, what more will you be doing in terms of encouraging people to join the course?
We have been travelling around Australia in our major cities, running weekend workshops, which we call Rethinking Capitalism. And in those workshops, we are able to give people a taste of what might be in the courses, obviously in a much less sort of academically rigorous format. It's much more a very brief kind of summary of some of the topics that we were also teaching in the master's degree, including things like trade and development, the deficit myth. We talk about also some political topics like how the state has kind of been captured by vested interests in the fossil fuel industry. We talk about ecological economics and the donut, and we just kind of touch on a bunch of these different topics, and then we allow people to go into discussion, and we also tell people obviously about the courses that we're running, so that if people are interested in learning more, or if they know somebody who might like to start a career as an economist, they get kind of the general idea about who we are and what we're teaching. So those have been a great success. We've done 7 of those Rethinking Capitalism workshops in the last 2 years, and we probably will keep doing them because they're good fun.
And we'll do it online at some point.
We will also try and turn it into much more of an online thing so that people across the world can join in on that. And it will be either free or virtually free. So that's something you can do without committing the finance. But I think also in terms of getting ready for next year, we would really like to be able to, when we have the finance side of it secure, is to start a scholarship fund so that we can try to help with the financial cost of the degree for people, especially in the Global South, people who wouldn't be able to access these courses otherwise. That's high on our agenda. So we would like to kind of restructure our organisation a bit and start a public fund where donors can contribute to that fund and get the deductible gift recipient status in Australia. We don't have that quite yet, but we're working on it, and then be able to offer scholarships. I think that would be really great.
It will just grow, I think, naturally over time. I do think there is a need for this course. The first intake of students have been the most enthusiastic students that I've ever come across in 37 years of teaching. So I cannot believe it's not going to grow over time naturally. And we'll just, we're not in a hurry. But I think it's going to be successful, and in the long run I'd like to be made redundant, because I would like all universities to be running something like we're doing at the moment, and that's perfectly all right with us. If in 10 years' time students like William can proudly boast that they're the first graduates of a program like this, but at that point in time you can do a program like this at Oxford and Harvard and Melbourne Uni and everywhere else in the world. That would be just marvellous. Now, I would love to see, and I believe I am going to see this, some of probably the younger graduates coming through this program in a position of influence in different countries around the world, where they are pushing the policies that we need governments to pursue if we're going to build an equitable and sustainable future.
I've been really lucky to be able to be an activist for my day job, I suppose, and work in different ways towards a safe climate and sustainable prosperity for everyone. And I think helping Stephen and Phil and our brilliant colleagues put this course together, I really feel like this is the most useful thing I can do with my energy and time, and I'm really thrilled to be able to be part of it.
That was the kind of modern equivalent of giving the teacher an apple, I think, but just dedicating some time in one of our shows to how good that course is and how much I appreciate it as a student. And I think you could see, Karen, just the passion of the two of them and the amount of effort that's gone into putting a course of this incredible depth together. So I'm really pleased I was able to do that for them.
Yeah. I mean, you have told me that it is a very in-depth course, and I was really surprised to hear that you've already had 50 lectures since you started. That's a huge amount of work. Absolutely. Yeah.
It was only two. She said that most. Gabi said that most people are only doing one of the courses. I did two of them, and after a couple of weeks, I thought there's no way this is a part-time course, because you're not getting through all of the reading or anything really. But what makes it so in depth is that before it tells you what is actually happening, whether it be the impact of GDP and what it's doing to the environment, or how the financial system really works, it has to start deconstructing what you've been told and what the neoliberal narrative is. So it has to do that first, and then it has to tell you what's actually happening. And if you study an orthodox course, it's almost half the work, because it's just telling you, it's not deconstructing anything, it's just telling you, effectively telling you these lies. So it's a huge amount of work, but hopefully it's worth it to enhance understanding of what's really going on.
So I don't know if our audience know, but you actually attempted an economics degree years ago in Dundee, and you left it because it just didn't make sense to you what they were teaching. And I hear this more and more as I take an interest in economics, that a lot of people actually did the same thing as you. They just went into this orthodox course and just thought, this doesn't sound like the real world.
Yeah, I suppose in a sense I've been waiting 30 years for this course, and there's people on the course who are even older than me, who've probably older than I am, who've been waiting maybe 40 or 50 years. But no, it's exactly when I first started economics. The story I often tell is that I wanted to cover price elasticity with drug addiction in Dundee, and my lecturer says to me, no, we don't deal with stuff like that. You need to find another example. And I remember thinking, well, this is really important. We need to understand this, and then we can try and fix it. But he said, no, go and talk about matches or new cars or something like that. And I remember thinking, I wanted to study economics to be able to solve the problems that the society was experiencing, and if I'm not getting that here, then I think I could need to go and do something else. And I did. I dropped that and went on to study something else. But yeah, it has been a long time to try and find a course that, as I said, deconstructs what you already know and then tells you a narrative that's based in the real world, and using real examples and not models that don't include things like money. Which seems absolutely crazy, but most of these neoliberal models don't include money because they just assume that money is just something that's created to help you reduce the transaction costs and the time and the effort, and because it's so not important, you can just drop it out of all the models. So these are really important things that most people don't understand when they think about economics.
If anyone's watching tonight, or another time as well, Professor Stephen Hale is featured in our second episode when he talks about government debt and what it actually is. And like many of the economists we've interviewed, they've started off with an orthodox education, and again, after working either in education or in Stephen's case, it was when he was working with bankers that he started to question his the knowledge that he'd gained at university.
They all start from this because it's your only option, really, if you want to study economics. Stephen Hale and Stephen Keen were both studying economics in the 70s. That was your only option. There just wasn't courses like this. It's taken that long. Here's the link to the course. It's right at the top of the comments, and I encourage you. Maybe it's not something you want to do, but have a look. And if there's anyone that who has got an interest in economics, but maybe just can't seem to find a course that's suitable for them, ask them to have a look at this, because as we said in the interview, it's online. There's people from all over the world. And listening back to it, I've just remembered that you said there's a player who plays for Queen of the South who's on the course. So we're going to have to get him on to speak about the course as well at some point, maybe after the next couple of modules. I don't know who that is. I'll have to find it out.
That's fantastic. Yeah. I'm really jealous. I'd like to be doing this course, but there's just no way that I can fit it in now that I've become a politician.
No, it's not something you can just drop in and do a couple of hours a week on, that's for sure. It's hugely in depth, and we've only done 2 of the 12 modules, so I've got another solid nearly 2 years ahead to get through to this, hopefully to get the master's qualification. It's structured so that you can get a certificate, a diploma and a master's. So I know some people, just by doing the 2 introductory courses, which the ones I just finished last term, are able to qualify for the certificate. And even after that, it's a huge amount of knowledge and really beneficial.
Yeah, it's so exciting. I'm so excited for them. They both have worked really hard and campaigned really hard for this. And you can see the positive effect that will come, as he was saying, if students graduate and end up in places of influence where, they can bring a positive and ecological view to economics going forward in all kinds of places.
Yeah, and that's really their passion. It's to get that learning out there to make a difference. We're lucky. Stephen's going to join us live from Adelaide for one of our sessions on the Sunday of SCOTONOMICS Live. He's going to do an introduction to modern monetary theory, and I can't think of anyone better to do that, and people will love spending that time with him. It's going to be a live virtual session. He's going to go through MMT and answer questions. I know a lot of people have always got questions to us when we talk about it, so that's a little pitch for SCOTONOMICS Live as well. But we've also got Fidel Kabud, who was on that video, and we've also got Steve Keen speaking at the event as well. So loads and loads of content around MMT and ecological economics as part of SCOTONOMICS Live.
It's fantastic. Yeah.
Great. Well, I hope you found that interesting. Next week, we're back to a bit more of a normal show for us. We've got a fantastic interview with Alex Coburn, who's the Chief Executive of the Tax Justice Network. And we interviewed him just towards the end of last week, and we've got a fantastic 45-minute interview with him, and we covered a lot of different areas and really fascinating. And we hope to get him on later in the year, because he's doing a lot of work with the Scottish Government on the, I think it's the Poverty Commission, and also stuff around taxation as well. So really interesting chap. Kieran, that's all for me. Anything you want to say before we head off?
No, I'm just really happy that you're doing this course and learning loads from it, which you can hopefully share with me.
I will, and the audience as well. Until next week, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.